So fuzzing is simply sending different data in a number of requests and seeing what comes back. It can be really useful in discovering content or functionality. And in this video, we're going to look at both Burp Suite's Intruder and also wfuzz, but there are actually many different tools you can use. I recommend you try out different ones to see what suits your workflow or methodology. In this demo, I'm going to be using an endpoint from Bookstore, which you can see on screen now. And this is a free room available on TryHackMe. So by all means, go ahead, sign up an account to TryHackMe and come to Bookstore if you want to follow along. So here we have some API documentation, and we can see that we have API/v2/resources and /books. And the author here in this case, or in this example, is J.K. Rowling. And we can also filter by things like the publish date. And what I've done is I've set this up in repeater. So you can see that I'm sending a request to API v2 resources books and the parameter published and the value 1993. And we do indeed get some data back. Now, there are a few points here that I want to think about when I start fuzzing. So the first one is V2. So when I see this, I always think, is there a V1? Is there a V0? Is there a beta? Is there a V3? Is there a V4? So this is probably our first point of call for fuzzing the endpoint. After that, I want to look at the endpoint here. So we're in resources. There might be other endpoints available as well, aside from books, for example, authors. And then after that, we look at the parameters. So what parameters will this endpoint take? Will it take published? Will it take unpublished? Will it take other things? And then finally, after this, we can look at the parameter values. And here we're probably looking for things like injection techniques or special characters to see whether our input is handled in an insecure way. So let's make a start with this. And to begin with, all I'm going to do is change this. I'm going to do this manually because our data set is quite small, and we send V0 and we get 404 not found. Okay, and we get V1 and we get 200 OK, which is interesting because we also got 200 OK on V2. So a couple of things that we want to look at here are the status code, so 200, and we want to see the content length as well. So this is 408. So if I then send the request to V2, we can see that we get the same content length. So I'm pretty sure that this data is the same as the previous one. And in this case, it's quite easy to check. We can just go left and right, and the only thing that changes is the time date stamp or the timestamp here. But if we had a page with a content length of like 10, 20,000, then it would be a little bit harder to check. So next up, we want to take a look at /books. So I'm going to press Control-I to send this to the intruder. And if you don't have Burp Suite Professional, don't worry. We're going to do the exact same thing with wfuzz in just a minute. So we'll do Burp Suite first and then wfuzz afterwards. And we come to intruder. We clear this. We add our payload point here. We come to payloads and then we load. And let's just do a small word list for now. And we'll click Start Attack. And you can see that the content length of the original request is 620, and the other ones look like they're 292. So I'll give this a minute to run. And now it's finished, we can take a look at the results. And it doesn't look like we got anything else. We only have one request with a different length and only one request with the status 200. All of the rest were 404s. Unsuccessful here, but still useful to check. So I'm just going to discard this and then come back. And then let's clear this selection and let's change this published to something else. And let's attack the published field. Probably we can keep the same word list. looks like it didn't find anything once again. So it looks like there's nothing too exciting to find against this endpoint. But what we're going to do is we're going to try the same thing against the V1 endpoint. And I'm just going to keep the attack the same and just click start and see what it comes back with. All right, so let's take a look. And we do actually get something that gave us a 500 response instead of 404, or a totally different content length. And this was the parameter show. And we can come in here, take a look at the response, and we get a internal server error. So I suspect, given that we get this name error, name file name is not defined, what I think is happening here is that the parameter is then throwing the error. So we're passing this, sorry, the value is throwing the error. So we're passing this value into the parameter show, even though it says published here, and that's causing an issue. So let's discard this, come back to our repeater, change this to 1, change this to show, click send, and we get 500. And let's see what happens if we give it a blank parameter. We get not found. And what we can now do is clear this, do show, hit the parameter value, and then start the attack again. And at this point, we probably want to think about different word lists. So we're doing a kind of a generic word list at the moment that's good at finding directories, but we probably want to consider something that's a little bit more targeted based on the error message that we got. And since it said invalid file name or file not found or something like this, if I recall, we might want to consider a list of common Linux files because the target system is a Linux system. All right, so I'm actually going to close this because it seems like the application is struggling a little bit under our attack, which can happen when you're fuzzing, especially for vulnerable endpoints. And I'm just going to come back here, just do a quick refresh. So it actually seems like we've found a vulnerable endpoint. But we've unfortunately crashed the application, which is a great lesson to learn because this can happen when we're fuzzing. Fuzzing can be quite destructive. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back here. I'm just going to terminate the machine. And then I'm just going to start it up again. And I'll see you back here in a minute so that we can review what's happened. All right, so I've just restarted the application, brought it back up, loaded in a new list. So I'm using common now in user share word lists deb instead of this small list. And we're going to see how this goes. So I just click start attack. And instantly I actually get some with different lengths. So I'm actually going to pause this quickly to take a look and see what's happening. So our initial request is 500. So we get a response back that says internal server error and the error file name is not defined, which is the error that we got before. And then we have a request that has a blank payload. So this gives us a 404 not found. And then interestingly, we get a 200 response for bash history. So we come back and we actually see that we have some data here. So it seems like it's reading from the .bash history file. So we have indeed found a vulnerable endpoint and managed to fuzz for local file inclusion vulnerability. So super interesting. And hopefully this gives you a good insight into how useful, but also sometimes how dangerous fuzzing can actually be. So before we do this in wfuzz, let's just take another quick look at the positions. So First, we looked at /v1, while this was /v2 before, and we guessed that there might be other versions of the API endpoint available. And then we looked at the books endpoints. We looked for other endpoints that were not listed on the documentation. So if you recall, we only had this documentation, which only gave us a few different endpoints. And then we looked at parameter names, which is where we found the show parameter, which wasn't listed in our documentation. And then we fuzzed the parameter value to discover that this was vulnerable to file inclusion. All right, so let's come over to our terminal and let's try this with wfuzz. So all I'm going to do is type wfuzz and we're going to add some color and then -z for the type. And the file we're going to use is, I like to add a space here so I can use autocomplete with the tab, and then I'll remove the space afterwards. So user share word lists derb. And I think we used the common. And then I'm just going to come back and remove that. And then what we want to do is grab the target. So in this case, we can take the IP address, http:// and then take the endpoint. Here, and we type fuzz, and I think we need this in quotes as well. So I'm just going to run this to begin with without any filtering. And you'll notice that we get a lot of data back. So what we actually want to do is we want to filter out the 500s. So here we're only looking for the values of the HTTP response codes of 200. So I can just do --sc 200. That didn't work as expected. Maybe it's HC. I can't remember off the top of my head. We might have to add this back here. Okay, so the order matters. So you need to add this, I think, before our target. So the target needs to be the final thing in our list of inputs. And as you can see, this time around, we just get our 3 responses that we want instead of lots of 500 errors. And we found bash rc, profile, and bash history. And I suspect this is also a little bit faster than Burp Suite as well. So this can be a good option for you. Gives you a little bit more control out of what's coming out of the tool rather than being bogged down with a user interface. And it's really up to you which tools you want to use going forward. And that's it for this video. So I hope this was a nice quick introduction to fuzzing, something that is really, really important to learn and understand how to do. But really, you only get better at it by doing it. And throughout the course, you'll have plenty of chances to try fuzzing against different applications that you'll have access to. I'll see you in the next video.